July 7th, 2014, Israel began a massive assault in the Gaza Strip, Palestine. In the first week alone, Israel dropped over 400 tons of bombs, killing over 130 Palestinians. The majority were civilians, and about half of them were women and children. By the time you're watching this, the number will be higher. Israel's official justification for this wholesale slaughter: the murder of 3 Israeli teenagers, which Israel blames on Hamas. That's not the real reason. First of all, Israel has not produced one single piece of evidence implicating Hamas or even a Palestinian in the murders. And in fact, the evidence that we do have indicates that the murderers were Israeli. You see, on Tuesday, July 1st, the Jerusalem Post released the audio of the kidnapped teens' distress call to the police. And in that call, the kidnappers can be heard telling the boys to put their head down in Hebrew. According to the Jerusalem Post, prior to being leaked to the public, this audio was being held under a gag order by the Israeli government. So why is Israel really attacking Gaza? It's not about self-defense. It's obviously not about avenging those 3 teenagers. Those are just cover stories for the naive. What this is really about is natural gas. It turns out that Gaza has quite a bit of natural gas on its coastline, one of the largest sources in the region. British Gas, which holds a joint exploration agreement for the area, estimates that the fields hold at least 1 trillion cubic feet of gas. That gas belongs to the Palestinian people, and they should be the ones to benefit from it. Israel disagrees. After the death of Yasser Arafat, under questionable circumstances, Israel has controlled those fields, and British Gas has negotiated with Tel Aviv. With power divided between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, the Palestinians have been too weak to put up any meaningful resistance, and Israel would like to keep it that way. The unity government between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority threatens Israel's control of those fields, and as such, it has to be destroyed. It's pretty basic, really. These are the motives of all wars: resources, territory, and power. You'll always come up with an excuse, and it's easy to fall for them if you don't do your research. But there's also a really easy way to avoid getting duped. Always stand against wars of aggression. Period. Make it a matter of principle, and the facts and morality will always end up being on your side. Speaking of morality, even if those teenagers had been killed by Hamas, what kind of psychopath thinks that this gives Israel the right to go and kill over 100 people who had nothing to do with it? We're talking about little kids here. Listen, I'm not going to show you the pictures of the dead or dying children in this video, but I've gone and looked at them. And as a father, it's almost unbearable to see something like that. If hearing about those bombs falling doesn't faze you emotionally, this is just a political debate for you, then go look at the pictures. You have no right to defend what Israel is doing if you don't have the courage to even glance at the consequences. And anyone who would justify these crimes after seeing the civilian casualties should be ashamed of themselves. The bombing of heavily populated residential areas is a war crime, and the US government is funding it with your tax dollars. That's right, Israel receives over $3 billion in foreign aid from the US each year. Of course, it's no accident that you've never had to face what's being done to the Palestinians in your name. If you turn on the mainstream media at any point during this crisis, all you'll see is a constant stream of reports focusing on the Palestinian rockets being fired in response. These reports conveniently fail to mention that as of yet, these primitive rockets have not killed one single Israeli. The Obama administration is also running with this artificial narrative.
We strongly condemn the continuing rocket fire into Israel and the deliberate targeting of civilians by terrorist organizations in Gaza. No country can accept rocket fire aimed at civilians, and we support Israel's right to defend itself against these vicious attacks.
But the rockets. Let's all bring this back to the puny homemade rockets that the Palestinians are launching out of desperation. Yeah, let's talk about that. Pretend for a moment that this wasn't happening in the Middle East, but rather in the southwest of the United States. Hey, just for kicks, let's say it was happening in Palestine, Texas. So 3 teenagers from Mexico are visiting Palestine, Texas, and they get killed. By somebody. We don't know who. Mexico, of course, takes this as an invitation to launch airstrikes on the entire region. For 10 days, the Mexican Air Force dutifully pummels Palestine, Texas, and the surrounding villages, but unfortunately, these darn rednecks were unaware that this was perfectly within Mexico's rights. So they started taking pot shots at the Mexican fighter jets with shotguns and deer rifles, and some started shooting in the general direction of the Mexican border. The bullets didn't reach their targets, but they still tried to defend themselves, and that is unacceptable. Sound absurd? That's what you people sound like when you parrot the mainstream media and these talk show pundits without thinking. Totally incoherent. Israel isn't defending itself against the Palestinians any more than the Europeans were defending themselves against the natives of the Americas. Year after year, the Israelis have taken more Palestinian land, bulldozed more homes, set up new settlements, and systematically expelled the inhabitants. You can make up justifications or deny it all you want, but the maps don't lie. Of course, there are those who are actually okay with what these maps tell us. There are people who like to assert that Israel has the right to steal every inch of Palestinian land, because supposedly 1,500 or so years ago, their Jewish ancestors were expelled. They call this the right of return. Okay, let's run with that. Let's take the right of return as a given. Rights are an interesting topic. The thing about rights is that if a human right actually exists, then it would have to be universal to all of humanity. So what about the Palestinians' right of return? Don't you find it a bit odd that one of the primary stipulations that Israel always imposes upon the Palestinians during negotiations is that in order to reach a peace agreement, the Palestinians would have to accept that they have no right to return to the land that was taken from them over the past 50 years? We're not talking about people who have some kind of abstract ancestral claim. These are the actual people who lost their homes and their farms and their businesses in this lifetime. So is the right of return an actual right or not? You can't have it both ways without exposing the dirty underbelly of this issue, which is that Zionism is a fundamentally racist and fascistic ideology. And no, Zionism is not inseparable from Judaism, and it has nothing to do with who you are genetically.
You know, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
So what can we do to help the Palestinians? You can start by actively engaging this debate everywhere it comes up. Don't avoid the conversation just to be polite. Women and children are being massacred right now in Gaza. And silence in the face of oppression is to take the side of the oppressors. It's time to start confronting those who support what Israel is doing right now. This isn't a matter of opinion or preference. To defend the use of the military against civilian populations is shameful, it's immoral, and it has consequences. A particular weight of responsibility sits on the shoulders of those in the so-called conservative churches in the US, because this is where the bulk of the support for Israel is found. It's up to you who see what's really going on to wake people up in your church. If the pastor in your church defends the bombardment of Gaza, or any war for that matter, you need to confront him. And if he doesn't respond when you confront him in private, you need to confront him publicly. If that sounds extreme to you, then go look at those pictures of the little kids who are on the receiving end of this. Seriously, go take a glimpse. But understand that the horror of seeing a photo of a dismembered child is nothing like what their parents are feeling. And to the people of Israel, you need to do some serious soul searching. Is this the image you want the world to have when they think of Israel? An image of a brutal oppressor that murders civilians without hesitation? But more importantly, is this what you want to be?
We want to see it in our own eyes, not from television point of view. They chose Hamas to rule them. It's their fault. They got it to where it is now, not us.
But don't you think it'll get worse by bombing them?
No, I think that's the only solution. I think they should just clear off all the city. Just take it off the ground. Yes, I'm a little bit fascist.